Hello everyone and welcome back to API Test Hub. This is part 4 of our API testing series. In our previous video, we covered 2x and 3x status code. If you have missed that video, you can find its link in the description box. So in this video, we will be covering 4x and 5x status codes in detail. So let's get started. So the very first in 4x series is the 400 bad request. As we have already learned in our previous video that 400 status codes are related to client-side errors. So what happens in this 400 bad request? So whenever there is a request from the client, if it has some issues, so what kind of issues? It could be syntax issues in request body, or it can be missing header, or it can be issue with the header or with the parameter. So that in that case, server will not be able to understand the request, what kind of request you are sending. So server will respond back to the client with 400 bad requests that I'm not able to understand the syntax or the headers you are sending me for this particular request. So that is why I'm sending back you 400 bad requests. So whenever you see 400 bad requests while doing the testing of an API, then you have to make sure that whatever you are sending, it doesn't have any errors. So check your request body, check your request headers, request parameters to make sure that everything is correct in your request. If it is there is a minor mistake, then server will not be able to understand and process it, and it will send back the 400 bad request. So this was about 400 bad request. Next in the series is 401 unauthorized. So what is this error? This error is authentication error. So what happens is whenever you have to access a resource, you have to have a proper user ID and password. If you don't have it, the server will not recognize you and it will send you 401 unauthorized. So what basically is, you can understand it with the example of a login ID. So for example, you have to log into your employee portal. So what happens is you will log in into with your user ID and password, and server will identify you and it will allow you to log in. So in that case you won't get 401. But if you are trying to access the resource where you are not entering any login ID or user ID or password, or you are entering but it's incorrect, in that case server won't be able to recognize you and it will see that it's not a valid access to this resource. So it will not allow you to go into that resource. So it will give you 401 unauthorized authentication error, that you don't have a proper authorization to do that. So let's take an example. So this is a particular resource. I don't have any login ID and password to access this resource. So what will happen in this case? So if I go to this resource, it will say that you don't have access to do that. And if I go to networks tab, I can see that this particular resource will give me 401 unauthorized. So you can see here I'm getting 401 unauthorized, like what, that you don't have proper user ID and password to access this particular resource. If I have that both the things, that I can put it and I can authenticate myself and log into this particular resource. But as of now, I don't have it. That is why server is not able to recognize me. So this is about 401 unauthorized. You can remember it as the sign up thing, that to log in you have to have a proper user ID and password. If you don't have it, you will get this kind of error. We will understand about the authentication, authorization, and what is the API security in later videos, but as of now just understand it as a purpose of definition and what this status code means. So next in the series is 403 forbidden error. So we usually get confused with 401 and 403 errors. So what is the basic difference? So you can understand in simpler terms is like in 401 you haven't signed in. In 401 you don't have user id and password, or you have entered incorrect user id or password. That is why you are getting 401. But in 403 you have a valid user id, you are logged in, you are signed in, but you don't have proper permissions to do that. So let's understand it with an example. So example of this can be your Netflix account. So Netflix account, you have an account on kids profile, for example. So you are logged into kids profile, but you don't have permission to go to adults profile. So what happened in that case if you try to access to adults profile? So in that case server will not allow you to do that because you don't have permissions to do this. So server will say that okay, you have a valid id and password, but you don't have permission to access particular resource. So whenever you don't have permission to do some things, in that case you will get 403 forbidden. So 401 was that you the client itself doesn't have signed into particular resource, but in 403 you have signed in, the client has signed in, but it doesn't have permission to access particular resource. Another example could be an employee has signed into a company portal with proper employee id and password, but what happened in that case if the employee wants to access admin portal, so it will not be having permissions to do that, right? So in that case server will give back the 403 forbidden error, that you are forbidden for accessing this particular resource. Although you have proper id and password, but you are not allowed to access this particular portal. So in that case, you will get 403 forbidden error. So I hope this has cleared the difference between 401 and 403. So next in the series is 404 resource not found error. So what it means is, so whenever you are trying, the client is trying to access some resource which doesn't exist. So in that case, what will happen? The server will say that whatever the request you are making, it doesn't exist anywhere. So I'm sending back you 404. Let's understand with an example. So if you see here, I'm trying to access a post of zeroth index which doesn't exist. What will happen in this case is, so if I go here, I want to see like what's happening here is, so whenever I go here it doesn't understand it, so I'll get 404 not found, like whatever the resource you are trying to access doesn't exist. So if I change here the parameter to something else, maybe 1, so I can get the resource, so I'll get the 200. Okay, so that means the one which I was accessing with zeroth index doesn't exist. So that is why I was getting 404. So 404 is whenever you are requesting a resource but it's not present on the server, server is not able to find that resource, then you will get 404 status code error. So that was about this error. Next comes is 405 method not allowed status code. So what happens in this case is, so for example you are sending a request to the server, but server doesn't have proper support for that server, that particular request. So what it means, so whenever you send a request in the server, in the somewhere there is a code written for that particular request. So we have already learned that if you send a get method with a particular URI, you will get the details of a product. If you send the post, it will be get created the particular resource in the database or in the server, right? But how the server it's doing these things, so it's written somewhere using a code, right? So it's written somewhere in the documentation. You can find those documentation where which kind of a method is supported with which URI and the endpoint. As we already have seen that this is the method this is the method we usually send, and this is a URI, and in the URI we have an endpoint. This is called the endpoint, right? And what happens is the whole code is written somewhere, right? So in this case, 405 method not allowed means when you send a different kind of method which is not supported by the server. So what will happen here is I'm what I'm trying to do here is I'm sending delete with the user's profile, but in the code it supports only get method and post method. So it doesn't support delete method with this particular URI, this particular endpoint. So in that case, when the server will receive that request, it will see that okay, whatever you are sending me is, I can understand it, but I don't I understand this method, but I don't support it. I don't support delete method with this particular URL. So this particular URL and URI and the endpoint. So you need to change this method. If you send me the get instead of delete here, I will be able to process your request. So whenever you are sending some other method instead of the one which is supported, then you will get 405 method not allowed. We will see these kind of errors in demonstration while testing the APIs through a tool. So in at that time you will be more clear about these errors. So let's move to other errors. So next in the 400 series is the 422 unprocessable entity. So what is this error? So this error usually comes when you are sending a request which is invalid or incomplete. For example, you are trying to add some product to your cart, but you have missed the main mandatory fields of that product, like quality and description. So in the request you are not sending these two attributes and you want to add this product, then server will say okay, whatever the request I'm getting, it's not complete, so it's invalid, so I'm sending back you 422 unprocessed entity. Like, I cannot process the entity you have sent me, so I cannot create it. So basically server will not be able to validate the request. So it can be syntax wise it's correct, but so server is not able to process it because the things it wants from the uh, client is not present. So in that case you will get 422 unprocessable entity. So these were all about 400 series. So let's come towards the 500 series. So in the 500 series, the most commonly error which we see is 500 internal server errors. So you may have seen this error quite often in various websites. So this is the error when something is not good at server's end. So whatever starts with 500, that means there is an issue with the server. So what happens in this case is when you send a request to a server, for example here I am sending the request to the server to add some product to my cart, but at that time maybe server is doing something or there is some issue with the code of the server, it's not able to process your request. So whenever there is an issue in the server, it will give back you 500 internal server error. So while testing the API, you have to be very sure about 500 series status codes because they are very crucial. Why? Because they can hamper the functionality, they can hamper the load on the API. So you have to be very cautious about testing. Whenever you see the 500 internal server error, then you have to check the logs, you have to go to the detailed traces, why it's coming, where what is the root cause of that error. So you need to report those issues to the developers or the concerned teams. And how to check these error, what are the logging tools and everything, we will cover each and everything in our upcoming videos by step. So as of now, just understand that this 500 internal error is the one which comes from the server. So next in the series is 501 not implemented status code. So what it is and why it comes. So it is basically the status code which comes when you are sending a particular request which server doesn't understand. So in this case, server doesn't understand this patch method and this particular request I am sending. So what it means, it doesn't understand. Understanding means we don't have a code for this particular kind of URI anywhere in the server. So whatever you are sending me here, I don't understand like what kind of method it is. There is no code written anywhere. So that is why your server is not able to understand. So for example, you are testing an API, so you mistakenly, instead of a post, you give the patch method, and you are again and again you are getting 501 not implemented. That means that whatever you have to check your method and your URI and the endpoint. What are you sending to the server? Is it correct, whatever you are sending? Because 401 means that this is not implemented. Like, we haven't implemented the logic you are sending me, right? So there is some code which implements everything, so it's not implemented anywhere and you are trying to access it. Then server will say it's not implemented, change your method, whatever you are sending, then maybe I will able to understand. And to check these, what are the implementation, whatever has implemented, you can always check from documentations of API. So that documentation, what are that, where we can find it, we will learn everything. So just wait for upcoming videos to understand those, but as of now just understand, when there is no implementation for particular resource, only then you will get 501 not implemented status code. So next comes 502 bad gateway. So what is bad gateway? So sometimes what happens is, in your request flow, one server calls the other server. So this is also a case that you are giving a request to one server, and that server is again going to different server. So you can take this example, like I'm sending a request to get the rates of the product. So server 1 will send a request to server 2, but server 2 for some reason is not able to calculate the rate and doesn't give back the response to server 1. So in that case, what server 1 will do? Server 1 will say that I'm not able to get the response back, so I'm sending back you 502 bad gateway. That means one server was not able to get the response back, or it got the bad response from another server. That is why we are getting 502 bad gateway. So whenever you get these kind of errors, so then you have to understand there is some issue with the server connectivity and the server is getting bad responses from the another server. So this was about 502 bad gateway. Next in the series is 503 service unavailable. So as the name suggests, that it comes when the server is not available. So server can be unavailable due to various reasons. Maybe there is a, it's down, it's not up yet, or there is too much load on the server, so it's temporarily shut down. So in that case as well, you will get 503 service unavailable error, that server is not up and it's not able to process whatever you are sending. So so this is 503 service unavailable error. So this was all about the 5x, 4x and 5x status codes. So a quick recap, that we have covered all the most commonly used 4x and 5x status codes in this video, why they are important and why there is a need for them to learn for the API testing. So as an API tester, these status codes are really important to understand if you want to know the root cause of the error. So sometimes you get the 400 errors and you need to know that if it's 400, then you have to check upon the request you are sending. So before reporting it to the developer, you have to make sure that your request is correct. So whatever you are sending in the headers, everything is correct. Only then report it to the developers or the concerned teams. So that is the main criteria an API tester has to do. So that we learned throughout our video. So that was all about the status codes, which we already covered. So we will see the demonstration in our upcoming videos. So that was all about status codes. And in the upcoming video, which will be the next video of our API testing series, will be on testing tools. So what are different API testing tools which we can use to do the API testing? So we will learn about those in our next video. So until then, stay tuned and keep learning. Thank you so much.